By 1990, He-Man had been such a huge hit they were ready to revive it. They wanted to see those big numbers. I think all of America was ready to see another version because it was such a charming original production. You couldn't beat it.
Shortly after Filmation Studios closed its doors, He-Man toy creators Mattel decided to revive the character and relaunch the franchise. They contacted Jet-Lag production creators Mark Taylor and Jean Chalopin to craft a new animated series based on their toy line. Writer Jack Olisker was soon hired to produce a series Bible and a 5-part story that introduced the new concept, in which He-Man leaves the Eternia of the past to journey to the future to stop the plans of time-displaced Skeletor and Flogg. Join us now to take a look at the magic behind creating the new adventures of He-Man.
The new series had a new premise. He-Man had to come forward in the future, so of course he needed a haircut and he needed a new look. So he was redesigned with the new characters. Skeletor, who chased him, had eyes. There's a whole new feeling about this show. Everything had a new look. It was more streamlined, and it was it had a slight Japanese feeling to it. Something that gave it a lot more excitement compared to what was happening on television at the time. One of the great things about this new Adventures of He-Man was that it was being produced by Mark Taylor and his company, Jet-Lag Productions. Mark went on to some very, very wonderful things. Later in his career, he produced some shows that I was directing, in fact. He did Jumanji, the animated series, The Men in Black, a lot of really, really fun, exciting adventure series. And he had put together the development group that was running the show.
I started work on the New Adventures of He-Man. I was working with Jack Mendelson, who was the story editor on that show, and he and I had worked together on a couple of previous shows. And so, by means I'm not entirely clear about, the show was brought to Jack, probably by Mark Taylor. And so since I was already working with Jack, I just fell into the slot that I'd been doing before, of working, doing story editing and script massaging and things like that. My official title, I believe, was Assistant Story Editor. I actually haven't seen a credit, end credit to know that for sure, but it was on the other shows I worked on. So I assume that my job title was Assistant Story Editor on New Adventures. It entailed mostly taking in scripts from outside writers, and of which most of the show is written by outside writers, and making them work within the format of the show that we envisioned. A lot of first drafts would come in and they'd be rough or they wouldn't quite work for one reason or another, and I'd do a pass on them and then hand them off to Jack, and he would do a pass on them, and they would go back for production.
I first got involved with the New Adventures of He-Man because Jack Mendelson, who was the story editor on it, asked me to come on board. I'd done a whole bunch of another show for him, and he, I guess, felt that I could handle this, so he asked me to come up with some ideas. I did, and I bought a few, and we were off and running.
My co-writer on the episodes for New Adventures was Ted Peterson, and he and I had worked together on a number of other shows, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I think James Bond Jr. came later, but we were writing partners for like almost 12 years. Basically, he's someone I knew from animation, business. And when I was story editing, I was so busy rewriting other people's scripts, I didn't have time to write originals, So I thought maybe share the load with somebody, and I trusted Ted and his ideas, and so he and I teamed up together and wrote the episodes.
A people who can build travel through time, yet are unable to defend themselves. I like that. It's almost enough to make even me smile. I think I will smile. Did I tell you to smile?
Comparing it with the original classic He-Man, much more set in what you call a sword and sorcery world, and this one was much more set in a high-tech world, and I think that's mostly a reflection of kind of current tastes when we did the show.
The difference between them didn't bother me that much. There was a little more space-oriented stuff in the second one, but I think both of the ones that I wrote, if I remember correctly, were kind of planet-bound. So, or at least one was in the dream dimension, but so I really didn't have to worry too much about the outer space stuff.
The sci-fi version is a great show. A lot of people criticise it because it's not He-Man. The way I look at it is that it's not He-Man, but it's someone's alternate. It's like an alternate version of him. It's like someone else came up with the idea of He-Man. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna have this guy in space. So that's what that is to me. I never try and compare it to the old show or the most recent show. I just try and treat it as a separate entity. It's like, this is He-Man in space, someone else's idea. And when you watch it like that, there are some great episodes. Teela comes back as well, so watch it.
What sort of trick is this?
Greetings from Eternia!
Teela? But how?
I'll explain later, He-Man. First, let's you and I finish them off, shall we?
Just like old times. Teela? Impossible. Whose magic challenges mine?
So we meet again, Skeletor. Things have been so peaceful on Eternia since you've been gone.
Lucky Eternia.
The people who were producing the show clearly wanted something to differentiate their show from the previous version. So I think that was the impulse. I mean, that's the way to go with, if you're going to do a remake of an original, is you got to bring your own thing to it.
The first time I discovered the New Adventures of He-Man was quite interesting. There was a magazine in the 80s I remember called Comic Scene, and in the back of it they used to highlight what new cartoons were coming out, and obviously this was an American publication, and all they had was He-Man 1989, new series about He-Man. I was like, oh wow. The UK picked up the rights to show it, and like the reruns of the original He-Man, they'd show it on a daily basis. It wasn't shown in the afternoon at 4:20, it was shown on a daily basis, so you got your big filling of He-Man, as it were. And over about the space of 10 episodes, I realised what a good show it is, and it is an amazing show. Even though it takes everything you know about the old show and kind of throws it out the window, still He-Man and still Skeletor are the same. Skeletor, if anything, is a hell of a lot funnier. I mean, obviously that's one of the criticisms of the original show, was that Skeletor was like yang 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 and all this. But in the new show they did it in a certain way. At times he was almost like Jack Nicholson with some of his, he did a few lines actually, I think they pilfered from a few Jack Nicholson movies, but he was a good character. He-Man was slightly bland, but he was still He-Man. Everything that mattered to him was still there.
My first writing staff job was on She-Ra for Filmation, and I think one of the reasons that I took to New Adventures so well is because there was a lot to compare with the two. There was this kind of heroic mold, kind of, you know, the superhero, but this, I mean, it was more than, it was almost the straight arrow superhero kind of genre. We did a little twist to that in the New Adventures, because we gave He-Man a little more of a sense of humor and maybe a little more edgy than it was in the original, or the original He-Man. So that was a big contrast, as I recall. I mean, no one would bring a show to Jack Mendelsohn if they didn't want some comedy in it, you know, because that was his area, you know, that's where he was strong.
He-Man was very, very straight in the original production. He was rugged, he was moral, and he had a sister. And she was rugged and moral, and they were very serious about it. But in this new series, The New Adventures of He-Man, they tried to play it with a little more gentle touch, a little more tongue-in-cheek, with a little more humor, and it was very, very successful.
Stop it! Come on, stop it, will you? I can't stand it! Stop it now! We mutants know you are a noble soldier! Too much!
There's actually more of a change in the character of Skeletor. I thought, I remember that the one direction they gave me on that was they said, Skeletor is Jack Nicholson in the first Batman. So he's maniacal, he's cackling, he's always making with the jokes and everything. I said, and this is different from the other Skeletor, how?
We did do Skeletor when I was writing on She-Ra, So, and he was much more of a straight-laced villain. And the new Skeletor in the New Adventures had, I mean, to me it was shocking when I went back and looked at the scripts, you know, thinking about this interview. To me it was shocking to see a character like this arch villain go, oops, you know, and have, you know, pratfall kind of thing, you know, because that's not something that would have gone over well with the original Skeletor. One of the episodes, I think it was You're in the Army Now, Adam has a couple of pratfalls in the same kind of way, which is not something we would have done on the old show. There was still, you know, the heroic mold, but we were not averse to throwing in some that kind of humor.
Skeletor, the new show was very, very exciting. It had a brand new Skeletor with eyeballs. It was a big departure, perhaps influenced by the feature film. There was Flog, the Rule of Denebria, a very, very scary villain. Slushhead, Critter, she was a female. Optique, and Butthead, sometimes known as BH, and Staghorn, which was very, very dangerous if you were around him around Christmas time because of, you know, you might be hanging stockings off his antlers.
Flog and Slushhead were kind of menacing mutants who couldn't get out of their own way. So it was both that thing where if it was a character who needed to be in peril, they were villainous enough, but if someone even anywhere near their equal was in the room, they fell apart like you know, cheap suit. So it was, again, that was more going for that humorous element in the New Adventures than we would have gone for in the previous He-Man.
Say, He-Man. You actually fell for the old fake injury trick. I bet you even believe that my dog ate my homework.
Ah, the scientists. They were basically the comedy relief. I was told that, you know, you sort of bring them out every now and then. They do the shtick, you know, they're a little, you know, that kind of stuff, and then they go back into their laboratory. And then when you ever need, you know, your basic Deus Ex Machina to save the day, they'll come up with something somehow or other. I guess they were sort of like a combination of Man-at-Arms and Orko, sort of a can-do kind of guys who were constantly fetching and, you know, yelling at each other. I really thought they were going to, at any moment they're going to break out and, you know, that kind of thing. They wouldn't let us do that though. And can't have any fun. The New Adventures also was one of the first shows to have kind of an anime look, because they were starting over in Japan and all around there. They were starting to get that whole anime thing going, and it hasn't stopped yet.
Thus, with the power of the good and the way of the magic, we struggle.
The New Adventures of He-Man had 65 episodes. The original, of course, had 2 seasons, so it had double the amount of episodes. However, 65 episodes in the market of 1990 was a big, big improvement over the usual 15 to 22 episodes that most series get. So they had a tremendous run, and fans were still ecstatic.
One of the best things about the New Adventures of He-Man was that it could do stories, it could do stories that you think, oh, I'd wish Filmation had done that. For instance, one of them had Prince Adam tried and basically put in prison for running away during this battle, and obviously he ran away to transform into He-Man. So there's this whole episode told in flashback of how he's talking to Master Sebrin, who's one of the main characters, and saying, this is why I ran off in battle, and he's like, right, obviously I know you're He-Man and we've got to try and clear your name. So it's a great plot about He-Man's, you know, secret identity and, you know, how it could mess up in the worst possible way.
I think what we're going for, whether or not we achieved it, is an issue we'll leave for whatever posterity is around to decide. But what we're going for is to put this guy, this man who is an all superhero, in a position where he can see the other side, see what was going on with the other side. And of course you can't have, as I recall, you can't have that kind of you know, reverse without suddenly imperiling him. He's going to be stuck there forever, or it's going to change his personality in ways that were not predicted by the scientists, who never get anything right. So I think those two elements, I think, were at play in that episode.
Not my headquarters! Yes, destroy Primus!
The story for Adam's Adventure was very simple, basically. We wanted to do a story about Skeletor coming close to discovering that He-Man had a secret identity, which he'd never really done before. I don't think we even did that on the old show. So I came up with this thing that would sense He-Man's biorhythms, and then there's a shift in it or something when he goes back to Adam. He's not super anymore, so it shifts his biorhythms back to a more normal thing. And Skeletor sees that and he says, aha, there must be a secret identity. And so then he goes and he kidnaps, if I remember correctly, He-Man, and brings him back to the Denebia, and then there's a lot of torture and the yelling and the screaming and all that, and then we rescue him at the end, and he gets a chance to whip up on Skeletor. I play with Adam's character a little bit versus He-Man's character, and it's always kind of fun to have somebody say, "Wait a minute, you're never there," when that sort of thing. What was fun was having Skeletor try and figure that out.
Be ridiculous.
That was more interesting.
Not here.
Because he actually got a chance to use whatever brain there was in that skull.
Is He-Man in disguise? One of us? He-Man? Surely you must be mistaken. I have recorded He-Man's brainwaves, and brainwaves don't lie. I know. He was on the Eternia.
The Planet of Junk, I think the title was probably the funniest thing in that, but it was a serious kind of undertone with that, with the same theme I think that we explored in Brain Drain, which was the temptations of all this technology. No villain worth his salt is going to turn us down, but again, it was less the implications than the sabotage by the scientists that turned things around. But I think I remember our original approach was going to be that the weaponry itself was just going to be aware enough to see who was using it and turn itself off or turn against its users. But for some reason that idea didn't fly with the studio. They wanted, I think, a more active role for the good guys and to have the scientists actually not be so cowed as to just do everything Skeletor tells them.
The Galactic Guardians! Emergency! This is Gepper. Come in, please!
Geppel, where are you?
On an asteroid in the Kara sector. Coordinates G372, R764. He-Man, the mutants are planning something horrible.
Every episode, when we had Skeletor featured at all, there was it was almost like a wacky guy, it was like the Cable guy, who was supposed to be this figure of menace, but we couldn't not let him be wacky, funny, do pratfalls, have remarks like, "Oh, I need my beauty sleep," or "I always keep an emergency escape pod and handy for situations like this." Lines like that, which we could have never gotten away with on the original, He-Man or She-Ra, were just as much a part of Skeletor's character as anything. I have to say, frankly, that's what made the show fun to write. I mean, if it was all straight-ahead villainy, Skeletor would not have been half as much fun for us, or probably the audience either.
Load the supercomputer in the shuttle pod. We're about to be attacked.
Slaves to the Machine, that was our, as I say, it was our Tron episode. We had an idea that technology being what it is, this is a possible outcome of events. So the idea that in a show that was kind of technologically fairly heavy, that we could see the bad results of it, I think was also an impulse for getting into that arena. It's the dark and the light side of this thing. Here's this thing that's good and we use all the time, but Slaves to the Machine could be the outcome of what we're up to.
Our Protectons have decided to end your war by occupying your planets.
That will not be necessary, Iman. We can take care of our problems in our own way.
The Protectons have ordered it. You will obey.
The Protectons? Who runs Machina anyway?
They do.
They wanted a story that would be somewhat different in terms of backgrounds and location, where we could see Skeletor doing something that we hadn't seen him do before. It rather surprised me, actually, because they were sort of actually saying, yes, let's do new backgrounds, let's spend some more money. It was just an idea that I had that would get inside their head and experience their dreams. The idea was so that Skeletor could basically do anything they wanted to with He-Man. He-Man would have to take it was like Skeletor was a complete master of the environment, and He-Man had to deal with that.
I can't move!
The whole idea of being inside somebody's head or being in an environment where that's mutable, that you can change around, that's a lot of fun. In later years, I sort of traded it for a kind of a cyberspace environment, but basically it's the same thing. You know, somebody who is like God in his own little world.
The brain drain episode was, I mean, I doubt that we thought of it in these terms, but it was like the Faustian bargain. You get this thing that can give you this power, or at least give your normally idiotic henchman this power, and it turns around and bites you in the butt. The idea there was to show that, you know, Skeletor's own limitations, you know, he could barely see beyond the next little thing he could grasp onto and seize as his own without thinking of the consequences. And if there was a moral there, it was definitely be careful what you wish for. I remember we had a lot of fun with that episode to turn these normally, you know, stumble-bum, double-digit IQ characters into something approaching genius. We had a lot of fun with that episode. I recall, you're in the Army now, because I believe Ted and I, when we cooked up this idea, we were looking for almost like a Pauly Shore version, but it really turned, you know, much more serious because of the loyalty of Adam, you know, to his own identity and all that was really severely tested here. So it became very strong in that regard, and it turned out probably better than if we'd gone in the other more humorous direction. That he could have proved himself innocent by showing that he was He-Man, but because of, you know, he couldn't do that, something else had to happen. So that was a lot of fun to write. I remember that. The idea that He-Man was invulnerable, that was the hardest part of the show, was coming up on, you know, weekly basis with the things that made him vulnerable. That you can't root for the guy who can't lose. That was a classical way that we could make He-Man vulnerable without having to give him actual physical weakness that, you know, would be contrary to the way his character was drawn. And it becomes a moral dilemma, you know, or it becomes a friend in danger versus saving the planet dilemma. You know, those kind of things. You could add vulnerability to an invulnerable character without sabotaging the concept.
Well, I'm told I was the only writer who worked on all three incarnations of He-Man. And I'm not sure whether to be thrilled or very depressed. I just, you know, they asked me to work on all three shows, and I was available for all three times, so I said sure. It was a paycheck, and they were fun to do. I don't recall being told that, oh, we thought your episodes for the old one were so good that we wanted you, because generally they don't want that much of a carryover. They want to be their own new show. They don't want to bring stuff in from the old show. So I was actually very surprised that being a writer on the older show, they asked me on the newer show. But they did.
When I was asked to do the interview, it was sort of like, gee, New Adventures of He-Man, I almost forgot about this. Who else remembers this show? You know, so I was astonished that you were even doing it. And just, my email's out there, and I guess people can find me, and I get email from fans of Turtles and from fans of She-Ra, fairly frequently, and people can tell me more about the episodes than I can recall. But I had not heard a word from, the fans of New Adventures of He-Man, if there were any out there even, So it will be, I'm looking forward to seeing what people have to say. I'm proud of most of my work. I work hard at making a show right, and we spend a lot of time at it. And given all the constraints that you're faced with, at deadlines and budgets and things like that, I think we did a heck of a job. One thing I would wish for people seeing the show for the first time is that they get as much fun out of watching it as we did making it work.
The New Adventures of He-Man, although it was in syndication, was not put into reruns very frequently. And this is the first time that anyone's ever had the chance to see it all polished up and on DVD, all collected at one time. So sit back and enjoy.
I swear I shall defend your planet and your people against all evil, against all who threaten your freedom.
Then this is a great day. Come. We've much to do.
Some of the stories I remember pitching the New Adventures were, there was one about a big plant that grew was taking over stuff. And there was one, I just remember the title, which would probably tell you what it was about. It was called He-Man, I Shrunk the Kids. And I'm shameless, It was starting the whole runaway production concept, which is ship it overseas because it's cheaper to do. And so obviously when the show's being done halfway around the world and there's something of a language barrier, I remember being cautioned not to use metaphors or any colloquialisms, because if you said something like, he's riding shotgun, then you're going to get what you're going to get, and you have only yourself to blame. So that was hard. You sort of had to write the script in very literal terms, and you couldn't use any sort of hyperbole or anything like that because it might come back animated very literally.